In today's podcast, I want to talk to you about how to help someone who's addicted. I've done one on our own little addictions, and we've all got addictions to certain degrees. But I'm just wanting to do this one about how do you help someone who's addicted, whether they're addicted to drugs, pharmaceuticals, alcohol, food, shopping, gambling, etc. That's what I want to talk about. We all have people we know who are addicted. We know that. We might not speak to them about it. We might think we have to mind our own business, but sometimes it gets so big we actually have to deal with it as well. And the first thing I want you to understand, it's not about the addiction. The addiction is the spiritual bandage they're putting on all the pain and the suffering and the trauma that they're feeling underneath, that they're carrying. Therefore, when you're their friend or their mother or their dad or their sister, do not judge them. They don't need you to give them a hard time. They don't need you to make them feel guilty or punish them in any way. You need to bypass the addiction and start trying to talk to them from your heart. Talking to someone who's addicted from your head will never work, because addiction isn't a head thing. Addiction is a heart thing, because addiction is all about human suffering and pain and loss and trauma and abuse. That's what addiction's all about. Many people come out of terrible childhoods where they ended up being traumatized emotionally and neglected emotionally. They perhaps were punished and lived with someone who only loved them conditionally, so it was a switch on, switch off love, which is very confusing for children and very damaging. And they've come out of these traumatic places. If there was abuse, there would even be more trauma. And not everyone remembers it. That's the thing. People who are addicted sometimes don't even remember the abuse. They've blocked it out just so beautifully that they just use the addiction to cover it up all the time. Your best thing to do with these people is to come from the heart and see if you can get them to get some counselling or think about how they're in pain, because that's what's happening with these people. People who are addicted are in pain and they're trying to find ways to soothe the pain, and that's where you need to go if you really want to help your friend. You need to go to talk about how hard it is for them. Maybe they do remember the abuse. Maybe you can get them to talk to you about it and encourage them to find someone they can talk to about the abuse or the trauma. If they've gone through some kind of trauma as well, then that'll set up an addiction. You need to go there. That's where you need to go. They don't need to be shamed or blamed. They already feel crap about themselves because they've got this huge, big pain and trauma that they don't know what to do with, and they haven't learnt yet how to let it go and how to release it and how to feel it and get it out of their system, so they're just doing the bandage. The best friend you can be, or the family member you can be, is the one who shows great heart and compassion and understanding, because in front of you is someone who's suffering, and people who suffer don't need anything but love and healing and compassion. That's what they actually need. And they need to find ways to release that suffering. I really feel talking about it, if you can get people to talk about what really upset them or what happened back there, that's going to release a lot. Sometimes people will cry. If you can get them to talk about the trauma, how traumatic something was, that's going to help as well. I just feel that's where you need to go, and encourage them to go back and maybe think about how they felt and ask them, how did you feel about that? How did that feel? So they can release it and let it go. Of course, you want to encourage them to see if they can get some therapy or counselling to do that kind of work where they let it go. And you might actually suggest to them some of the modalities like tapping and rebirthing, breath work, hypnosis, getting some massage to release it, going to an energy worker, someone who does Reiki or any kind of release work. You might want to encourage people to do that, to get rid of it, rather than blame and make them feel bad about themselves because they've done it. People don't want to be addicted. They've just found it's like their little panacea. It's a little thing that can help them get across that bridge when it gets too painful, it becomes unbearable, and they're carrying it. That's what that is. And that's why we do all those things, to numb it out. We're trying to numb out the pain. That's why people cut themselves, because they think the pain of the cutting is worse than the pain that they feel. And there's a lot of emotional pain with anyone who's suffering from any sort of addiction. And in that pain is usually trauma. And sometimes, and very often, I don't know why I'm saying sometimes, very often abuse. Any kind of abuse will set you up for this. They need you to love them. They need you to love them unconditionally. Of course, you might need to set boundaries with certain things, but you'll know how to do that in a loving way. And they need you to support them and be with them through the process. Because you see, when they were going through that process, I think they were alone, and they felt alone, and they had no support. Maybe they were a child or a teenager, or maybe they were in a relationship where they felt alone, and they had no one. So now part of you being there with them and for them, and encouraging them to get help for their feelings and their pain, and not focus on the addiction so much. Don't worry about the alcohol or the drugs or the smoking right now or the overeating. Don't worry about that. If we can get rid of all the emotions that trigger it, then they won't need that stuff as much. And then when they're ready to give it up, they will be able to give it up. But they won't be able to give it up when they're just walking around with this baggage of pain and trauma and suffering. You might understand it. You might have had some baggage too. We've all had some. But what happens, I think, is that some people just have too much, and it's almost like they get into overwhelm, and then they find something where they don't feel any pain for a while, and then they become like, oh wow, I want to feel like that more. And so that's where the addiction starts. However, if they start to address the pain that they feel and cry and sob and let it all out, and the misery that they're carrying, then they will not have to have that so much. They don't need us to be anything but their friends, their loving friend. And our society is so damning of anyone who's, addicted to things. We're so self-righteous and judging, because we're only looking at the addiction, aren't we? Like, oh, they're so weak, they can't give up drinking. Oh, yeah, they're really addicted. They should stop smoking. It's not good for their health. They know that. But if you look behind that, you have a pained person. You have a person who's suffering. And if you can start now to see people who are addicted, or if you have any of your own addictions, start looking at your own pain and suffering as well, you will often then be able to understand it. And then your whole demeanour and the way you speak and treat these people will be completely different. You won't be coming from thou shalt and what you should be doing and being condemning and judgmental. You won't be doing that. You'll be compassionate and loving and kind. I feel the more we deal with our pain and our trauma and our suffering, the healthier we will be. But we need to understand it's there, and you've got this huge, big, massive bit of pain or trauma or suffering locked up in your aura. That's what's happened. You've gone into a lockdown. You've locked it all down. Once you start unraveling it, and you can be part of helping them unravel it, then they can start to release it and finally address it. It's a coping mechanism. That's all it is. If you're going to get technical, that's all addiction is. It's a coping mechanism. But it has a backflip that if you do too much of it, then it ends up giving you even more problems. So if you can help your friend this way, start to see it differently, see your friend as a person who's like a trapped animal, always think like a tortured soul. That's what people who are addicted are, actually tortured souls. If you see that, then you're going to be a really great friend for them. And you can also send them healing, and you can send them prayers to help to release their suffering. Because, there's no real tablet that takes away emotional suffering. We haven't got one. You can have a headache and a sore foot and take some painkillers and the pain will go away. You can't take a Panadol and the pain goes away. It doesn't work that way. So the only way out of the pain is through the pain and releasing the pain. And you might be able to encourage your friend or your loved one or your family member to get rid of the pain, to release the pain, and to see the pain, because once we see it, then we're beginning to actually acknowledge it and kind of let it go. Because until you address your trauma or your abuse or your emotional pain or your suffering, until you actually go, yeah, that's where it's coming from, you haven't really got a hope. But while you're blindsided and won't look at it and just keep using your addiction, you don't really deal or face it. And you can be part of their process to help them in a really loving and beautiful way. So start to see addiction differently, please. Addiction is just pain in a glass, pain in a box of biscuits, pain in a cigarette, pain in a pharmaceutical. That's all addiction is. It's just emotional pain and suffering and grief and loss and all these other things that people have that we actually haven't dealt with. It's all the stuff we haven't dealt with. And once we start dealing with it and release it, then we don't need the other modalities to push it down. I hope you found this interesting. I think it's kind of where it's really at. And if you're a friend, maybe this is a different way for you to deal with it. I hope you get some good results from this with your friend, because I know you love them and you're really worried about them and you really want to help them. So try this, see if you can come from a different space. Okay, I'm sending you love and lots of healing, because watching someone who's addicted is also part of your suffering as well, isn't it? Say goodbye and good luck with this one.